Second Class Citizen by Buchi Emecheta. Chapter 1. Childhood. It had all begun like a dream, that sort of dream which seems to have originated from nowhere, yet one was always aware of its existence. One could feel it. One could be directed by it, unconsciously at first, until it became a reality, a presence. Ada did not know for sure what gave birth to her dream when it all started, but the earliest anchor she could pin down in this drift of nothingness was when she was about 8 years old. She was not even quite sure that she was exactly 8, because you see, she was a girl. She was a girl who had arrived when everyone was expecting and predicting a boy. So, since she was such a disappointment to her parents, to her immediate family, to her tribe, nobody thought of recording her birth. She was so insignificant. One thing was certain though, she was born during the Second World War. She felt 8 when she was being directed by a dream, for a younger child would not be capable of so many mischiefs. Thinking back on it all, now that she was grown up, she was sorry for her parents, but it was their own fault. They should not have had her in the first place, and that would have saved a lot of people a lot of headaches. Well, Ada thought she was 8 at the time when her mother and all the other society women were busying themselves to welcome the very first lawyer of their town, Ibuza. Whenever Ada was told that Ibuza was her town, she found it difficult to understand. Her parents, she was told, came from Ibuza, and so did many of her aunts and uncles. Ibuza, she was told, was a beautiful town. She had been taught at an early age that the people of Ibuza were friendly, that the food there was fresh, the spring water was pure, and the air was clean. The virtues of Ibuza were praised so much that Ada came to regard her being born in a god-forsaken place like Lagos as a misfortune. Her parents said that Lagos was a bad place, bad for bringing up children because here they picked up the Yoruba Ngbati accent. It was bad because it was a town with laws, a town where law ruled supreme. In Ibuza, they said, you took the law into your own hands. If a woman abused your child, you went straight into her hut, dragged her out, beat her up, or got beaten up, as the case might be. So, if you didn't want to be dragged out and beaten up, you wouldn't abuse another woman's child. Lagos was bad because this type of behavior was not allowed. You had to learn to control your temper, which Ada was taught was against the law of nature. The Ibuza women who lived in Lagos were preparing for the arrival of the town's first lawyer from the United Kingdom. The title, United Kingdom, when pronounced by Ada's father, sounded so heavy, like the type of noise one associated with bombs. It was so deep, so mysterious, that Ada's father always voiced it in harsh tones, wearing such a respectful expression as if he were speaking of God's holiest of holies. Going to the United Kingdom must surely be like paying God a visit. The United Kingdom then must be like heaven. The women of Ibuza bought identical cotton material from the UAC department store and had it made into lapas and blouses of the same style. They dyed their hair and straightened it with hot combs to make it look European. Nobody in their right senses would dream of welcoming a lawyer who had been to the United Kingdom with her hair left naturally in curls. They composed songs, weaving the name of the new lawyer into them. These women were so proud of this new lawyer because to them, it meant the arrival of their very own Messiah, a Messiah specially created for the Ibuza people, a Messiah who would go into politics and fight for the rights of the people of Ibuza, a Messiah who would see to it that Ibuza would have electricity, that Ibuza would have a tarred road, which Ada's mother called coal tar. Oh yes, lawyer Unwenzi was going to do all sorts of things for the people of Ibuza. Ada's mother was a seamstress, so she made most of the blouses. Ada was very lucky because she had some remnants from the material made into a frock for her. She still remembered the frock. It was so big for her that she more or less swam into it. Her mother would never dream of making her a dress that was exactly her size because, you see, she would soon outgrow it. So even though she was a small girl, too skinny for her age, whatever that might be, she always had dresses 3 or 4 sizes bigger. That was one of her reasons for liking old dresses, since by the time the dresses were old, they fitted her. She was so happy with this new lawyer dress that she begged her mother to let her go with the woman to the upper wharf on the great day. It pained her so much when she realized that she was not going to be allowed to go because it fell on a school day. School, the Igbos never played with that. They were realizing fast that one savior from poverty and disease was education. Every Igbo family saw to it that their children attended school. Boys were usually given preference though. So even though Ada was about 8, there were still discussions about whether it would be wise to send her to school. Even if she was sent to school, it was very doubtful whether it would be wise to let her stay long. A year or 2 would do, as long as she can write her name and count. Then she will learn how to sew. Ada had heard her mother say this many times to her friends. Soon, Ada's younger brother, Boy, started school. It was at this time that Ada's dream started to nudge her. Whenever she took Boy to Ladilak Institute, as the school was called, she would stand by the gate and watch all her friends lining up by the school door in their smart navy blue pinafores, looking clean and orderly. Ladilak was then, and still is, a very small preparatory school. Children were not taught Yoruba or any African language. This was why it was such an expensive school. The proprietress was trained in the United Kingdom. At that time, more than half of the children in the school were Igbos, as they were then highly motivated by middle-class values. Ada would stand there, filled with envy. This envy later gave way to frustration, which she showed in many small ways. She would lie, just for the joy of lying. She took secret joy in disobeying her mother, because she thought to herself, if not for Ma, Pa would have seen to it that I started school with Boy. One afternoon, Ma was sitting on the veranda of their house at Akunwumi Street. With Ada's help, she had cooked their afternoon meal and they had both eaten. Ma started to undo her hair, ready to have it replaited. Ada had seen her do this a million times and was bored with watching her. There was nothing for her to do. There was nobody to play with. There was not even any mischief to plan. Then the thought suddenly struck her. Yes, she would go to school. She would not go to Ladilak because Boy was there and they might ask her to pay, it being such an expensive school. She would go to the Methodist school round the corner. It was cheaper. Her ma had said that she liked the uniform. Most of her friends attended it. And Mr. Cole, the Sierra Leonean neighbor living next door to them, taught there. Yes, she would go there. Her dress was clean enough, though it was too big, but she thought of something to smarten it up. She went into their room, got an old scarf, twisted it round and round, so much so that it looked like a palm tree climber's rope, then tied it round her little waist, pulling the baggy dress up a little. Other children went to school with slates and pencils. She had none. It would look ridiculous for her to march into a classroom without a slate and pencil. Then another thought struck her. She had always watched Pa shave. Pa had a broken slate, on which he usually sharpened a funny sort of curved knife. Ada often watched him do this, fascinated. After sharpening the knife, Pa would rub some carbolic soap lather on his chin and then would shave it away. Ada thought of this slate, but the trouble was that it was so small, just a small piece. It would not take many letters, but a small bit of slate was better than no slate at all. She then slipped it into the top of her dress, knowing full well that her scarf belt would hold it up. Luck was with her. Before she left the room, one of Mer's innumerable friends came for a visit, and the two women were so engrossed in their chit-chat that they did not notice when Ada slipped past them. Thus, Ada went to school. She ran as fast as she could before anyone could stop her. She did not see any of Ma's friends because it was past midday and very hot. Most people were too tired to walk the streets at this time. She got tired running and she started to trot like a lame horse. Tired of trotting, she walked. She was soon at the schoolroom. There were two buildings in the compound. One was the church, and she had heard from her friends that the church was never used as a classroom. She knew which was the church because even though she had not started school, she attended Sunday school in the church. With her head up in determination, she walked down the center looking for Mr. Cole's class. This was easy for her because all the classes were separated from each other by low cardboard-like partitions. It was easy to see all the classes by simply walking down the middle. When she saw Mr. Cole, she walked into his class and stood behind him. The other children looked up from their work and stared at Ada in wonder. At first, there was a hush so tangible that one could almost hold and feel it. Then one silly child started to giggle, and the others followed suit, until almost every child in the class was giggling in such an uncontrollable way that Mr. Cole glared at the children who had all gone crazy for all he knew. Then it happened. The child who started the giggle covered her mouth with one hand and pointed at Ada with the other. Mr. Cole was a huge African, very young, very handsome. He was a real black man. His blackness shone like polished black leather. He was a very quiet man, but he used to smile at Ada every time he passed her on his way to school. Ada was sure Mr. Cole would give her that reassuring smile now, in front of all these giggling idiots. Mr. Cole spun round with such alacrity that Ada took a step backwards. She was not frightened of Mr. Cole. It was just that the movement was so quick and so unexpected of Mr. Cole with his great bulk. Only God above knew what he expected to find behind him. A big gorilla or a wandering masquerade, perhaps. But all he saw was Ada staring at him. God bless Mr. Cole. He did not laugh. He took in the situation immediately, gave Ada one of those special smiles, held out his hand, and led her to a boy who had crocro on his head and gestured her to sit down. Ada did not know what to make of this gesture. She felt Mr. Cole should have asked her why she came. But being reassured by his smile, she said in her little loud voice, "I came to school. My parents would not send me." The class went quiet once more. The boy with the crocro on his head, who later became a lecturer in Lagos City Hospital, gave her a bit of his pencil, and Ada scribbled away, enjoying the smell of crocro and dried sweat. She never forgot the smell of school. The day ended too soon for Ada's liking, but they must go home, Mr. Cole assured her. Yes, of course she could come again if she liked, but if her parents would not allow her come, he would take it upon himself to teach her the alphabet. If only Mr. Cole would not bring her parents into it. Pa would be all right. He would probably cane her, just a few strokes, 6 or so, not much. But Ma would not cane. She would smack, and then nag all day. She thought that it was these experiences with Ma so early in life that had given her such a very low opinion of her own sex. Somebody said somewhere that our characters are usually formed early in life. Yes, that somebody was right. Women still made Ada nervous. They had a way of snapping her self-confidence. She did have 1 or 2 women friends with whom she discussed the weather and fashion. But when in real trouble, she would rather look for a man. Men were so solid, so safe. Mr. Cole took her to the store of women selling boli, which is the Yoruba name for roasted plantain. These women usually had open pots in which they made a kind of coal fire. These fires were covered with wire gauze, and on the gauze were placed peeled plantains, ready for roasting. Mr. Cole fed her with a big bully and told her not to worry. It was another story when they got home. At home, things had got out of hand. In fact, there was a big hula baloo going on. Pa had been called from work. Ma was with the police being charged with child neglect, and the child that had caused all this fuss was little Ada, staring at all of them, afraid and yet triumphant. They took Ma to the police station and forced her to drink a big bowl of gari with water. Gari is a tasteless sort of flour made from cassava. When cooked and eaten with soup, it is delicious. But when uncooked, the water type Ma was forced to drink, it became a torture. Purgatorial, in fact. Those policemen, Ada still wondered where they got all their unwritten laws from. This happened at the police station near Sabo Market. Ma told them with tears in her eyes that she could swallow the gari no more. She must drink the whole lot, she was told, and told in such language that Ada hid behind Mr. Cole. If Ma did not finish the gari, the policemen went on. They would take her to court. How they laughed at her own jokes, those horrid men, and how they scared Ada. Ma went on gulping, her eyes dilating. Ada was scared. She started to howl, and Pa, who had very little, begged the policemen to stop. They should let Ma go now, he explained, for she had learnt her lesson. She was a great talker, very careless, otherwise Ada would not have been able to slip away as she had. Women were like that. They sat in the house, ate, gossiped, and slept. They would not even look after their children properly. But the policemen should forgive her now because Pa thought she had had enough gari. The chief policeman considered this plea, then took once more at Ma, cupping the gari to her mouth with her fingers, and smiled. He took pity on Ma, but warned her that if such a thing should happen again, he personally would take her to court. You know what that means? He thundered. Ma nodded. She knew court meant two things: a heavy fine which she would never be able to afford, or prison, which she called prison. They advised her to sell one of her colorful lapas and send Ada to school because she looked like a child who was keen to learn. At this point, Ma gave Ada a queer look. A look that contained a mixture of fear, love, and wonder. Ada shrank back, still clutching Mr. Cole. When they got home from the station, the news had already got around. Ada had nearly sent her mother to prison. So frequently was this sentence repeated that Ada began to be quite proud of her impulsive move. She felt triumphant, especially when she heard Pa's friends advising him to make sure he allowed Ada go to school soon. This discussion took place on the veranda, where the visitors were downing 2 kegs of palm wine to wet their parched throats. When they departed, Ada was left alone with her parents. Things were not as bad as she thought they would be. Pa fished out the cane and gave her a few strokes for Ma's benefit. Ada did not mind because they were not hard strokes. Maybe Pa had been mellowed by the talks with his friends, because when Ada cried after the caning, he came and talked to her seriously, just as if she were a grown-up. He called her by a pet name, Nena, which means father's mother, which was not so far from the meaning of Ada's real name. How she came by that name was a story in itself. When Pa's mother was dying, she had promised Pa that she would come again, this time as his daughter. She was so sorry she could not live to bring him up. She died when Pa was only 5. She would come again, she had promised, to compensate for leaving him so young. Well, Pa grew up and married Ma at the Christ Church in Lagos, which was a Christian church, but Pa did not forget his mother's promise. The only reservation he had was that he did not want a girl for his first child. Well, his mother was impatient. Ma had a girl. Pa thought that Ada was the very picture of his mother, even though Ada was born 2 months prematurely. He was quite positive that the little damp monkey-like thing with unformed face was his comeback mother. So, she was loaded with strings of names: Nina, Adanna, Ada Eze. Ada Eze means princess, daughter of a king. Sometimes they call her Ada Eze, sometimes Adanna, and sometimes Nina. But these strings of names was too long and too confusing for Ada's Yoruba friends and playmates, and even more so for impatient Ma. So she became just Ada. She did not mind this. It was short. Everybody could pronounce it. When she grew up and was attending the Methodist Girls' High School in Lagos, where she came in contact with European missionaries, her name was one of the first ones they learned and pronounced correctly. This usually gave her a start against other girls with long names like Adebisi Bambosi or Oluwafomilayo Oloronshogo. So, that was how Ada started school. Pa would not hear of her going to the Methodist primary. She was to go to the posh one, Lady Luck. Success in life would surely have come earlier to her if Pa had lived. But he died soon after, and Ada and her brother boy were transferred to an inferior school. Despite all this, Ada's dream never left her. It was understandable that Ma refused to take her to see the new lawyer because Ada started school only a few weeks before the preparations for the great man's arrival. Ma really got furious with Ada for asking such a thing. You made me drink garri only last month until I nearly burst my stomach, all because you said you wanted school. Now we gave you school, you want the WAF. No, you won't go. You chose school. To school you must go from now until you go grey. How right Ma was. Ada would never stop learning. She had been a student ever since. Ada's face had fallen at this. If only she had known before, she would have staged a school drama after the arrival of lawyer Uwezi. But as it turned out, she missed little. The women practiced their songs several times and showed off their uniform, to which they had given the name Ezidiji de Ogoli Omeoba, meaning when a good man holds a woman, she becomes like the queen. They wove the name of the uniform into the song, and it was a joy to hear and see these women, happy in their innocence, just like children. Their wants were simply and easily met, not like those of their children, who later got caught up in the entangled web of industrialization. Ada's Ma had no experience of having to keep up mortgage payments. She never knew what it was to have a family car, or worry about its innards. She had no worries about pollution, the population explosion, or race. It was surprising, therefore, that she was happy, being unaware of the so-called joys of civilization and all its pitfalls. They went to the wharf that day, these happy women, to welcome someone who had been to have a taste of that civilization, the civilization which was soon afterwards to hook them all like opium. That day, they were happy to welcome their man. They went in their new uniform. Ada still remembered its color. It had a dark velvety background with pale blue drawings of feathers on it. The headscarf was red, and it was tied in such a way that it displayed their straightened hair. The shoes they wore were of black patent leather called 99. No one really knew why. Maybe it was the rhythm of the repetition. In any case, they wore these 99 shoes with their Ezidiji Jide Ogoli Meoba and brought new gourds which they covered with colorful beads. When these gourds were rattled, they produced sounds like the Spanish samba with a wild sort of animal overtone. They had a good time, Ada was told later. They danced happily at the wharf, shaking their colorful gourds in the air. The European arrivals gaped at them. They had never seen anything like it before. The climax of it all was when an Englishman took their photographs. He even singled out women with babies behind their backs and took several shots of them. Ma and her friends were really happy to have their pictures taken by Europeans. These were the days before Nigerian independence, when nearly every boat from England brought hundreds of English graduates and doctors to work in the schools and hospitals of Lagos. The few gaps in the magical story of Onwezi's arrival were filled in by Pa. All the Ibuza men went to welcome him the following Sunday. They could not leave their places of work during the week. Pa said that the lawyer could not swallow pounded yam anymore. He could not even eat a piece of bone. The meat they cooked for him had to be stewed for days until it was almost a pulp. I felt like being sick, Pa said as he spat on the floor. It reminded me of sickly watery food we ate in the army. There's one thing though, Pa went on. He did not bring a white woman with him. All Pa's friends agreed with him that that was a good thing. If Owezi had brought a white woman to Ibuza, Oboshi would have sent leprosy on her. Remembering all these taboos and superstitions of the Western Igbos of Nigeria, Ada could not help laughing to herself. She had been brought up with them. They were all part of her, yet now, in the 70s, the thought of them amused her. The funniest thing about all these superstitions and beliefs was that they still had such a doleful grip on the minds of her people. No one dared ignore any of them. Leprosy was a disease with which the goddess of the biggest river in Ibuza cursed anyone who dared to flout one of the town's traditions. Well, Pa and his friends toasted the river of River Oboshi for not allowing lawyer Onwezi to go astray. That Oboshi was strong enough to guide the thoughts of Onwezi demonstrated her power. They toasted her again. Later, Ada did not know what came over that River Oboshi though. Oil was discovered very near her, and she allowed the oilmen to dig into her without cursing them with leprosy. The oilmen were mainly white, which was a surprise. Or perhaps she had long been declared redundant by the greater gods. That would not have surprised Ada, for everybody could be declared redundant these days, even goddesses. If not redundant, then she must have been in a Rip Van Winkle sleep, for she also allowed the Hausa soldiers to come and massacre her sons, and some Ibuza men had married white women without getting leprosy. Only last year, an Ibuza girl graduate had married a white American, so Oboshi was faster than most of her sons and daughters at catching up with the times. Anyway, the talk about Iwezi's arrival went on for months and months. Ada talked about him to all her friends at school, telling them that he was her cousin. Well, everybody else talked big, so she might as well. But she made a secret vow to herself that she would go to this United Kingdom one day. Her arrival there would be the pinnacle of her ambition. She dared not tell anyone. They might decide to have her head examined or something. A small girl of her kind, with a father who was only a railwayman and a mother who knew nothing but the Igbo Bible and the Igbo Anglican hymn book, from the introduction to the index, and who still thought that Jerusalem was at the right hand of God. That she would go to the United Kingdom one day was a dream she kept to herself, but dreams soon assumed substance. It lived with her, just like a presence. Chapter 2. Escape into elitism. Most dreams, as all dreamers know quite well, do have setbacks. Ada's dream was no exception, for hers had many. The first hitch happened all of a sudden. Just a few months after she started school, Pa went to the hospital for something. She could not remember what. Then someone she was not quite sure who it was told her that Pa was staying there for a few days. A week or two later, Pa was brought home, a corpse. After that, things moved so fast that she sometimes got them confused. Ada, like most girl orphans, was to live with her mother's elder brother as a servant. Ma was inherited by Pa's brother, and Boy was to live with one of Pa's cousins. It was decided that the money in the family, £100 or two, would be spent on boy's education. So boy was cut out for a bright future with a grammar school education and all that. Ade's schooling would have to be stopped, but somebody pointed out that the longer she stayed at school, the bigger the dowry her future husband would pay for her. After all, she was too young for marriage at the age of 9 or so, and moreover, the extra money she would fetch would tide boy over. So for the time being, Ada stayed at school. Ada missed her old school, the cleanliness, the orderliness, and the brightness, but she could not continue there. The fee was almost 6 times the cost of the others, and she had to get herself used to an older and noisier school, otherwise she would not be allowed to go to school at all. But she had gained something from a short stay at Ladylak, a very good and sound beginning, which put her ahead for her new class. Her efforts amused her cousins greatly. They regarded her as a funny little girl. She was glad though that they mercifully left her to dream away after she had done her day's work. The day's work, Jesus. Her day started at 4:30 in the morning. On the veranda of a new home in Pike Street, there was a mighty drum used as a water container, and Ada had to fill this with water before going to school. This usually meant making 10 to 12 trips to the public pump, as those public monstrosities were called in those days. In Ada's new family, there was Ma's brother, who worked in the dockyard at the marina. His old wife, a quite retiring woman, who was a shadow to her autocratic husband, and their 4 mighty sons, all grown up. One was married with a young daughter. One was working as a clerk in the treasury. One was an artist who would stay at home and sing all day. The youngest was at a finishing school. So Pa's death was a blessing to them, for it meant they could have Ada as an unpaid servant to help in this Belgian household. All these people occupied only 1 room and a veranda, yet the house had 10 rooms. One could imagine the number of households that depended on the pump at Pike Street, for it served 8 other streets as well. It was always a case of first come, first serve. By 7 or 8 in the mornings, there were usually fights. Metal buckets were thrown in the air, fists drawn, and clothes torn. To avoid this rush hour, Ada was usually woken up at 4:30. Her being up so early was also a great help to a new pa and master. He went to work by 6:30 in the mornings, and Ada had to be there to get him his odds and ends. One might think on this evidence that Africans treated their children badly, but to Ada's people and to Ada herself, this was not so at all. It was the custom. Children, especially girls, were taught to be very useful very early in life, and this had its advantages. For instance, Ada learned very early to be responsible for herself. Nobody was interested in her for her own sake, only in the money she would fetch, and the housework she could do, and Ada, happy at being given this opportunity of survival, did not waste time thinking about its rights or wrongs. She had to survive. Time went by quickly, and when she reached the age of 11, people started asking her when she was going to leave school. This was an urgent question because the fund for boys' education was running low. Ma was not happy with her new husband, and it was considered time that Ada started making a financial contribution to her family. This terrified Ada. For a time, it seemed as if she must give in to save Ma from the humiliating position she found herself in. She hated Ma for marrying again, thinking it was a betrayal of Pa. Sometimes she dreamt of marrying Ellie, a rich man who would allow Ma and boy come and stay with her. That would have solved a lot of problems, but the kind of men that she was being pushed to by her clever cousins and Ma's tactful hints were bald and huge, almost as big as her dead Pa. Ma had told her that older men took better care of their wives than the young and overeducated ones, but Ada didn't like them. She would never in her life get married to any man, rich or poor, to whom she would have to serve his food on a bended knee. She would not consent to live with a husband, whom she would have to treat as a master and refer to as sir, even behind his back. She knew that all Igbo women did this, but she wasn't going to. Unfortunately, her obstinacy gained her a very bad reputation. What nobody told her then was that The older men were encouraged to come and talk to her because only they could afford the high bride price Ma was asking. Since, however, she didn't know this, as soon as she saw one of those baldies in his white starched trousers, she would burst into native songs about bad old baldies. If that failed to repel them, she would go to the backyard and burst the bicycle tires of the suitors. She discovered later that this was very bad indeed, because she had since learned that the Nigerian government usually gave their junior clerks an advance for these bicycles. All the suitors were doing then was to ask for the advance for their new rally bikes with flashy lights in order to impress Ada. But the stupid girl refused to be impressed. The number of suitors did start to dwindle though. Maybe word went around that she was a peculiar girl, for she did look funny in those days. All head with odd colored hair and a tummy that would have graced any Oxfam poster. She was subsequently told that they stopped coming because she was cranky and ugly. She did not dispute that. She was ugly then, all skin and bone. The thought of her having to leave school at the end of the year worried her so much that she lost weight. She acquired a pathetically anxious look, the type some insane people have, with eyes as blank as contact lenses. At about this time, something happened that showed her that her dream was just suffering a tiny dent, just a small one, nothing deep enough to destroy the basic structure. The dream had by now assumed an image in her mind. It seemed to take life, to breathe, and to smile kindly at her. The smile of the presence became wide as the headmaster of Ada's school announced the list of available secondary schools which the children could apply for. You are going, you must go, and to one of the very best of schools. Not only are you going to do well there. Ada heard the presence telling her. She heard it so much that she started to smile. The headmaster's voice jolted her back to reality. And what is it about me that you find so funny, Ada Ophili? Me, sir? Oh no, sir. I was not laughing. I mean, not smiling, sir. You were not what? You mean I am lying? Well, back her up. Immediately, a group of 3 or 4 tough-looking boys came out from the back row, and the biggest of them all swept Ada onto his back, and 2 others held her feet, while the headmaster administered the cane on her posterior. To ease the pain, she sank her sharp teeth deep into the back of the poor boy who was backing her. He started to scream loudly, but Ada would not let go, not even when the caning stopped. The boy wriggled in agony, and so did Ada. All the teachers came to the rescue. Ada's teeth had dug so deep into him that the fragments of his flesh were stuck between her teeth. She quickly spat them out and wiped her mouth, looking at them all wide-eyed. You will go to jail for this, the headmaster thundered, and he took the boy into his office for first aid. From that day on, no boy ever volunteered to back Ada up anymore, but that incident gave her a nickname which she never lived down, the Igbo Tigress. Some of her Yoruba classmates used to ask her what human flesh tasted like, because you Igbos used to eat people, didn't you? Well, Ada didn't know about that cannibalistic tendencies of her tribe. All she knew was that the headmaster's cane bent her so much that she felt irrepressible urges to pass the pain to something else. Latifu, the boy who was doing the backing, happened to be the closest victim, so he had to take it. Ada also felt that she was being unjustly punished. She had been smiling at the presence, not the headmaster, and she suspected that the headmaster knew she was telling the truth. He had simply wanted to cane her. That was all. Ada waited for days for the law, which the headmaster said was coming to take her to jail. No police came for her. So she decided that she had either been forgotten or that her bite of Latifu was not deep enough to merit imprisonment. The thought nagged her, though. It nagged her so much that she was tempted to commit another atrocity, this time a really horrible one that nearly sent her not to jail, but to her maker. Ada was given 2 shillings to buy a pound of steak from a market called Sandground. She looked at a 2-shilling piece for a very, very long time. All she needed to take the entrance examination to school of her dreams was 2 shillings. Didn't Jesus say that one should not steal? But she was sure there was a place in the Bible where it said that one could be as clever as the serpent, but as harmless as the dove. Would she be harming anybody if she paid for the entrance exam's fee with these 2 shillings? Would Jesus condemn her for doing it? For stealing? After all, her cousin could afford the money, though he would not give it to her if she asked for it in the proper way. What was she to do? That was the trouble with Jesus. He never answered you. He never really gave you any sign of what to do in such tempting situation. Anybody could twist what he said to suit his own interpretation. Then she saw the image again. It was going to be all right. The image was smiling. So Ada buried the money and went back home in tears without the meat. She was really no good at lying. The wildness in her eyes had a way of betraying her. If only she could have kept her large eyes lowered, it would have been all right. People would have believed the story. But she kept staring into their eyes, and her face showed her up like a mirror. "You are lying, Ada," her cousin's wife said, pointedly. Ada opened her mouth, but had to close it quickly, because no sound came. She knew what was going to happen to her. The cane. She did not mind this caning because she knew that anybody who sinned must be punished. What she did not bargain for was the extent of the punishment. Her cousin sent her out with a 3-penny piece to buy the type of cane called the koboko. It was the one the houses used for their horses. There was nothing Ada could do but buy it. Her cousin warned her that he would not stop administering the cane until she told him the truth. That was bad, thought Ada. She had to go to the Methodist Girls' High School or die. She concentrated her mind on something else. After the burning of the first few strokes, her skin became hardened, and so did her heart. She started to count. When Cousin Vincent had counted to 50, he appealed to Ada to cry a little. If only she would cry and beg for mercy, he would let her go. But Ada would not take the bait. She began to see herself as another martyr. She was being punished for what she believed in. Meanwhile, Cousin Vincent's anger increased. He caned her wildly, all over her body. After 103 strokes, he told Ada that he would never talk to her again, not in this world, nor in the world to come. Ada did not mind that. She was, in fact, very happy. She had earned the 2 shillings. The headmaster at her school did not believe his ears when Ada told him that she was going to sit for the common entrance examination. He looked at her kwashiorkor-ridden body for a very long time, then shrugged his shoulders. One can never tell with you Igbos. You are the greatest misery the good God has created. So he put her name down. Sometimes the thought that she might not be able to pay the fees crossed her mind, but she did not let that worry her. She had read somewhere that there was some sort of scholarship for the 5 or so children who did the best in the exam. She was going to compete for one of those places. She was so determined that not even the fact that her number was 947 frightened her. She was going to that school, and that was that. But how was she to tell them at home? She had stopped liking Cousin Vincent. Every time she knelt down to pray, she used to tell God to send him to hell. She did not believe in that stuff of loving your enemy. After all, God did not like the devil. So why should he pray for the man who had the heart to cane her for a good 2 hours with a koboko? When Cousin Vincent failed his Cambridge school certificate examinations, Ada burst out laughing. God had heard her prayers. The entrance examination was to take place on Saturday. That was going to be very difficult. How was she to get away? Another lie? She could not do that again. She would be discovered, and they would stop her from taking the examination. So she told her uncle, Ma's brother, that she was going to sit for the examination. The funniest thing was that nobody even asked her where she got the money from. Nobody wanted to know. As long as she was not asking for money from anybody, and as long as she had done her Saturday job, she could go to the devil for all they cared. Occasionally, the mother of the house, Ma's sister-in-law, would ask how she proposed to get the money for the school fees and remind her that her father was dead. In response, Ada's mind would flutter with fear, but she never told anyone she was dreaming of winning a scholarship. That was too big an ambition for a girl like her to express. She was aware that nobody was interested in her since Pa died. Even if she had failed, she would have accepted it as one of the hurdles of life. But she did not fail. She not only passed the entrance examination, but she got a scholarship with full board. She never knew whether she came first or second, or even third, but she was one of the best children that year. Since then, she has started to be overawed by the presence. It existed right beside her, just like a companion. It comforted her during the long school holidays when she could not go home because there was no home for her to go to. She was very happy at the Methodist Girls' School, especially during the first 4 years. However, a cloud of indecision started to loom when her school days were coming to an end. It was incredible how quickly 5 years could pass. She would have liked to linger there, in the boarding house, to stretch each day into a year and each year into a century. But that was impossible. The final day came, and she was quite unprepared for life outside. She had some vague plans about what she was going to do. She was going to continue her education. She was going to go to Ibadan University to read classics, and she was going to teach at the end of it all. Well, there was one thing she had not bargained for. To read for a degree, to read for the entrance examination, or even for more A-levels, one needed a home. Not just any home, where there would be trouble today and fights tomorrow, but a good, quiet atmosphere where she could study in peace. Ada could not find a home like that. In Lagos at that time, teenagers were not allowed to live by themselves, and if the teenager happened to be a girl as well, living alone would be asking for trouble. In short, Ada had to marry. Francis was a very quiet young man who was reading to be an accountant. Ada congratulated herself on her marriage. At least, he was not an old baldy, neither was he a made man then, though there was no doubt that he was going to be made one day. To Ada, the greatest advantage was that she could go on studying at her own pace. She got great satisfaction too from the fact that Francis was too poor to pay the £500 bride price Ma and the other members of her family were asking. She was such an expensive bride because she was college trained, even though none of them had contributed to education. The anger of her people was so intense that none of them came to her wedding. The wedding itself was a hilarious affair. Francis and Ada were both underage, and the only witness, Francis's mother, had to sign with her thumb. The whole affair started off on the wrong foot. They had forgotten to buy a ring, and the skinny man with a black bow tie refused to marry them, even when Ada assured him that a piece of string would do until they got home. "I've never heard of such a wedding," the man declared, sweating in his tight collar. "Please marry us without a ring because you see, before we can get to Buchi Emecheta, you will have to close for the day," Ada begged. "Never mind about that. You just come back tomorrow with a ring and I will marry you." They were married the following day. It was the saddest day in Ada's whole life. She did not mind having to go home in a bus, neither did she mind not marrying in white, which she hated anyway. But still, she was sad, very sad for months after the marriage at the register office. Soon, however, things improved. Ada gave birth to a daughter, and she and Francis were both delighted with the baby. Then, after endless interviews and form fillings, Ada was selected to work as a librarian in the American Consulate Library at Campbell Street. The size of her pay packet worried Francis a little, and he had to ask his pa for advice. "Do you think our marriage will last if I allow Ada to go and work for the Americans? Her pay will be 3 times my own. My colleagues at work will laugh at me. What do you think I shall do?" "You're a fool of a man. You are. Where will she take the money to?" Her people who did not even come to congratulate her on the arrival of baby Titi. Her relatives who did not care whether she lived or died. The money is for you, can't you see? Let her go and work for 1,000,000 Americans and bring their money here into this house. It is your luck. You made a good choice in marriage, son. Francis was delighted as a schoolboy. Ada would have to be protected, especially on paydays. On the first payday, Ada was to be paid about £60 or so. Neither Ada nor Francis had ever seen such a fantastic sum. It was suggested that Francis should only work half a day in his office and then take a bus to meet Ada in order to be a bodyguard for his wife and their money. Both husband and wife carried the money to Tinubu Square in Ada's work bag like a delicate baby. They talked about their plans for this sudden prosperity. "We are ahead of all our colleagues, Francis remarked. "God is wonderful. Fancy me earning such a fantastic sum. Our new baby is going to be very lucky. If he happens to be a boy, we will call him Kennedy. And if a girl, we will call her Jacqueline." There was a long pause, during which the young couple eyed a man in agbada roped suspiciously. "Some of these rogues do smell money, Francis whispered. "Yes, I know," nodded Ada. Francis clutched the raffia bag tightly to his chest and frowned in the direction of the unsuspecting man. "I have been thinking," Ada said all of a sudden. "I used to dream that one day I would go to the United Kingdom. Why don't we save and go, now that we shall be able to afford it? We can take our children with us. Everybody goes to the United Kingdom now. I'll be glad if we can go too." The smile on Francis's face was like a warm sunshine after a thunderous rain. It spread from ear to ear on his beardless face. He would be very happy if they could make it. He would finish his accountancy and Ada would read librarianship. He would go first and Ada would send him £20 every month. She was to save for her fare and that of her children. She was to feed herself and the children whilst they were still in Lagos and pay the rent and help in paying the school fees of some of Francis's 7 sisters. Ada did not in the least mind being saddled with all these responsibilities, even though her bride price had not been paid. It never occurred to her to save her new high salary for a bride price. She knew that all she did would go towards making her young family into a family of Igbo elites, just like lawyer Nwenzi of Ibuza, who by then had become a minister in the northern Nigeria. That lawyer was a funny man, Ada thought. He did not come to the south, to Ibuza, to give the people of the town electricity, nor did he come to worship the river Oboshi. He just stayed put in the north, making barrels and barrels of money. When Ada was still at the American consulate, news appeared in the Nigerian papers that lawyer Nwenzi was defending a Hausa multimillionaire. From that day on, no boy ever volunteered to back Ada up anymore, but that incident gave her a nickname which she never lived down, the Igbo Tigress. Some of her Yoruba classmates used to ask her what human flesh tasted like, because you Igbos used to eat people, didn't you? Well, Ada didn't know about the cannibalistic tendencies of her tribe. All she knew was that the headmaster's cane burnt her so much that she felt irrepressible urges to pass the pain to someone else. Latifu, the boy who was doing the backing, happened to be the closest victim, so he had to take it. Ada also felt that she was being unjustly punished. She had been smiling at the presence, not the headmaster, and she suspected that the head teacher knew she was telling the truth. He had simply wanted to cane her, that was all. Ada waited for days for the law which the headmaster said was coming to take her to jail. No policeman came for her, so she decided that she had either been forgotten or that her bite of Latifu was not deep enough to merit imprisonment. The thought nagged her though. It nagged her so much that she was tempted to commit another atrocity, this time a really horrible one that nearly sent her not to jail but to her maker. Ada was given 2 shillings to buy a pound of steak from a market called Sandground. She looked at the 2 shilling piece for a very, very long time. All she needed to take the entrance examination to the school of her dreams was 2 shillings. Didn't Jesus say that one should not steal? But she was sure there was a place in the Bible where it said that one could be as clever as the serpent, but as harmless as the dove. Would she be harming anybody if she paid for her entrance examination fee with these 2 shillings? Would Jesus condemn her for doing it? For stealing? After all, her cousin could afford the money, though she would not give it to her if she asked for it in a proper way. What was she to do? That was the trouble with Jesus. He never answered you. He never really gave you a sign of what to do in such a tempting situation. Anybody could twist what he said to suit his own interpretation. Then she saw the image again. It was going to be all right. The image was smiling. So Ada buried the money and went back home in tears without the meat. She was really no good at lying. The wildness in her eyes had a way of betraying her. If only she could have kept her large eyes lowered, it would have been all right. People would have believed her story, but she kept staring into their eyes, and her face showed her up like a mirror. "You are lying, Ada," her cousin wife said, pointedly. Ada opened her mouth, but had to close it quickly because no sound came. She knew what was going to happen to her, the cane. She did not mind this caning because she knew that anybody who sinned must be punished. What she did not bargain for was the extent of the punishment. Her cousin sent her out with a 3-penny piece to buy the type of cane called koboko. It was the one the houses used for their horses. There was nothing Ada could do but buy it. Her cousin warned her that he would not stop administering the cane until she told him the truth. That was bad, thought Ada. She had to go to the Methodist girls' school or die. She concentrated her mind on something else. After the burning of the first few strokes, her skin became hardened, and so did her heart. She started to count. When Cousin Vincent had counted to 50, he appealed to Ada to cry a little. If only she would cry and beg for mercy, he would let her go. But Ada would not take the bait. She began to see herself as another martyr. She was being punished for what she believed in. Meanwhile, Cousin Vincent's anger increased. He caned her wildly all over her body. After 103 strokes, he told Ada that he would never talk to her again, not in this world, nor in the world to come. Ada did not mind that. She was, in fact, very happy. She had earned the 2 shillings. The headmaster at her school did not believe his ears when Ada told him that she was going to sit for the common entrance examination. He looked at the Kosciuszko-ridden body for a very long time, then shrugged his shoulders. One can never tell with you Igbos. You are the greatest mystery the good God has created. So he put her name down. Sometimes the thought that she might not be able to pay the fees crossed her mind, but she did not let that worry her. She had read somewhere that there was some sort of scholarship for the 5 or so children who did best in the exam. She was going to compete for one of those places. She was so determined that not even the fact that her number was 947 frightened her. She was going to that school, and that was that. But how was she to tell them at home? She had stopped liking Cousin Vincent. Every time she knelt down to pray, she used to tell God to send him to hell. She did not believe in that stuff of loving your enemy. After all, God did not like the devil, so why should she pray for the man who had the heart to cane her for a good 2 hours with koboko? When Cousin Vincent failed his Cambridge school certificate examinations, Ada burst out laughing. God had heard her prayers. The entrance examination was to take place on a Saturday. That was going to be very difficult. How was she to get away? Another lie? She could not do that again. She would be discovered and it would stop her from taking the examination. So she told her uncle, Ma's brother, that she was going to sit for the examination. The funniest thing was that nobody even asked her where she got the money from. Nobody wanted to know. As long as she was not asking for money from anybody, and as long as she had done her Saturday job, she could go to the devil for all they cared. Occasionally, the mother of the house, Ma's sister-in-law, would ask how she proposed to get the money for the school fees and remind her that her father was dead. In response, Ada's mind would flutter with fear, but she never told anyone she was dreaming of winning a scholarship. That was too big an ambition for a girl like her to express. She was aware that nobody was interested in her since Pa died. Even if she had failed, she would have accepted it as one of the hurdles of life. But she did not fail. She not only passed the entrance examination, but she got a scholarship with full board. She never knew whether she came first or second or even third, but she was one of the best children that year. Since then, she had started to be overawed by the presence. It existed right beside her, just like a companion. It comforted her during the long school holidays when she could not go home because there was no home for her to go to. She was very happy at the Methodist girls' school, especially during the first 4 years. However, a cloud of indecision started to loom when her school days were coming to an end. It was incredible how quickly 5 years could pass. She would have liked to linger there, in the boarding house, to stretch each day into a year and each year into a century. But that was impossible. The final day came and she was quite unprepared for life outside. She had some vague plans about what she was going to do. She was going to continue her education. She was going to the Ibadan University to read classics, and she was going to teach at the end of it all. Well, there was one thing she had not bargained for: to read for a degree. To read for the entrance examination, or even for more, A-levels, one needed a home. Not just any home where there would be trouble today and fights tomorrow, but a good quiet atmosphere where she could study in peace. Ada could not find a home like that. In Lagos at that time, teenagers were not allowed to live by themselves, and if the teenager happened to be a girl as well, living alone would be asking for trouble. In short, Ada had to marry. Francis was a very quiet young man who was reading to be an accountant. Ada congratulated herself on her marriage. At least, he was not an old baldy, neither was he a made man then, though there was no doubt that he was going to be made one day. To Ada, the greatest advantage was that she could go on studying at her own pace. She got great satisfaction too from the fact that Frances was too poor to pay the £500 bride price Ma and the other members of her family were asking. She was such an expensive bride because she was college trained, even though none of them had contributed to her education. The anger of her people was so intense that none of them came to her wedding. That wedding itself was a hilarious affair. Frances and Ada were both underage, and the only witness, Frances's mother, had to sign with a thumb. The whole affair started off on the wrong foot. They had forgotten to buy a ring, and the skinny man with the black bow tie refused to marry them, even when Ada assured him that a piece of string would do until they got home. "I've never heard of such a wedding," the man declared, sweating in his tight collar. "Please marry us without a ring, because you see, before you can get to Buchi Emecheta, you will have to close for the day." Ada begged. "Never mind about that. You just come back tomorrow with a ring, and I will marry you." They were married the following day. It was the saddest day in Ada's whole life. She did not mind having to go home in a bus. Neither did she mind not marrying in white, which she hated anyway. But still, she was sad, very sad, for months after the marriage at the register office. Soon, however, things improved. Ada gave birth to a daughter, and she and Frances were both delighted with the baby. Then, after endless interviews and form fillings, Ada was selected to work as a librarian in the American Consulate Library at Campbell Street. The size of her pay packet worried Frances a little, and he had to ask his pa for advice. "Do you think our marriage will last if I allow Ada to go and work for the Americans? Her pay will be 3 times my own. My colleagues at work would laugh at me. What do you think I should do?" "You're a fool of a man, you are. Where will she take the money to? Her people? Her people who did not even come to congratulate her on the arrival of baby Titi? Her relatives who did not care whether she lived or died? The money is for you, can't you see? Let her go and work for 1,000,000 Americans and bring their money here into this house. It is your luck. You made a good choice in marriage, son." Francis was delighted as a schoolboy. Ada would have to be protected, especially on the paydays. On the first payday, Ada was to be paid about £60 or so. Neither Ada or Francis had ever seen such a fantastic sum. It was decided that Francis should work only a half day in his office and then take a bus to meet Ada in order to be a bodyguard for his wife and their money. Both husband and wife carried the money to Timbu Square in Ada's work bag like a delicate baby. They talked about their plans for this sudden prosperity. "We are ahead of all our colleagues, you know," Francis remarked. "God is wonderful. Fancy me earning such a fantastic sum. Our new baby is going to be very lucky. If he happens to be a boy, we will call him Kennedy. And if a girl, we will call her Jacqueline." There was a long pause, during which the young couple eyed a man in Agbada robe suspiciously. "Some of these drugs do smell money, you know," Francis whispered. "Yes, I know," nodded Ada. Francis clutched the raffia bag tightly to his chest and frowned in the direction of the unsuspecting man. "I have been thinking," Ada said all of a sudden. "I used to dream that one day I would go to the United Kingdom. Why don't we save and go, now that we shall be able to afford it? We can take our children with us. Everybody goes to the United Kingdom now. I will be glad if we can go too." The smile on Francis's face was like a warm sunshine after a thunderous rain. It spread from ear to ear on his beardless face. He would be very happy if they could make it. He would finish his accountancy and Ada would read librarianship. He would go first and Ada would send him £20 every month. She was to save for a fare and that of the children. She was to feed herself and the children whilst they were still in Lagos and pay the rent and help in paying the school fees of some of Francis's 7 sisters. Ada did not in the least mind being saddled with all these responsibilities, even though her bride price had not been paid. It never occurred to her to save her new high salary for her bride price. She knew that all she did would go towards making a young family into a family of Igbo elite, just like lawyer Nwenze of Ibuza, who by then had become a minister in northern Nigeria. That lawyer was a funny man, Ada thought. He did not come to the south, to Ibuza, to give the people of the town electricity, nor did he come to worship the river Oboshi. He just stayed put in the north, making barrels and barrels of money. When Ada was still at the American consulate, news appeared in the Nigerian papers that lawyer Nwenze was defending a Hausa multimillionaire. They said the millionaire was so rich that he had a railway line built right down to his palace door. The man had 8 Rolls Royces. After the case, Nwenze ended up a millionaire himself. Ada still wondered how that happened, because the millionaire was jailed for forging notes in his great palace. Francis and Ada sometimes wondered what he had paid Nwenze with. In any case, that was Nwenze's headache, not Ada Obi's. As far as she was concerned, her dreams were all coming true. Her marriage was less than 18 months old, yet she already had 4 maids. 2 were paid £3 each. The other 2 were paid their fees for secondary schools. These 2, Cecilia and Angelina, were Francis's sisters. These 4 girls did all the work in the house. All Ada had to do was to go to the American library, work till 2:30, come home and be waited on the hand and foot, and in the evening be made love to. She did not disappoint her parents-in-law on that score. For apart from the fact that she earned enough money to keep them all going, she was very prolific, which among the Igbos is still the greatest asset a woman can have. A woman would be forgiven everything as long as she produced children. Ada was so fast on this score that she was given the nickname Touch Not among the other wives of her age group. As soon as her husband touches her, she gets a swollen tummy. They used to laugh. Later in England, writing about the time of her life almost with nostalgia, she used to ask herself why she had not been content with that sort of life, cushioned by the love of her parents-in-law, spoiled by the servants, and respected by Francis's younger sisters. As for her mother-in-law, she was everything that Ma was not: quiet, beautiful, and motherly. Some of Ade's friends used to think that she was Ade's real mother. They were so close. But she suspected somewhere in her heart that the contentment she had then was superficial. She did not know her husband very well because, as most young African wives know, most of the decisions about their own lives had to be referred first to a big pa, Francis's father, then to his mother, then discussed among the brothers of the family before Ada was referred to. She found all this ridiculous, the more so if the discussion involved finance. After all, she would have to pay for their plan in most cases, but the decision would have to be made behind her back. Of course, Francis was simpler, a puppet in such cases, and so was she. They could not refuse. They had to bow down to their elders. Elders or no elders, they were going to live their own lives. It would have to be fairer if some of the elders were from her own side of her family, but both Ade's parents were dead by then. Ma had died, aged 38, when Ada was in the hospital having TT, so she felt cheated in a way. Cheated by the fact that neither Pa nor Ma lived to see any of her children. Cheated by the fact that she was bringing so much joy into her husband's house and none into hers. Boy never visited her. Neither did any of her cousins and uncles. They felt Ada had let them down. They said Ada should have continued her education and become a doctor, since she had managed to struggle through secondary school. But nobody talked of who was going to support her. Nobody talked of where she was going to live. So she found herself alone once more, forced into a situation dictated by society in which, as an individual, she had little choice. She would rather that she and her husband, whom she was beginning to love, move to new surroundings, a new country, and among new people. So she said special prayers to God, asking him to make Pa agree to their going to the land of her dreams, the United Kingdom. Just like her Pa, she still said the name United Kingdom in a whisper, even when talking to God about it. But now she felt it was coming nearer to her. She was beginning to believe she would go to England. Francis broke the good news to her one day after their evening meal. Pa had agreed, he said. Ada was so full of happiness that she started to dance an African calypso. So they were going at last. She was soon going to be called Bintu, which was a Lagos phrase for those who had been to England. Francis allowed her to finish before he dropped the bombshell. You know how old-fashioned father is. Ada knew and nodded, startled by her husband's grave tones. Father does not approve of women going to the UK. But you see, you will pay for me and look after yourself, and within 3 years, I will be back. Father said you are earning more than most people who have been to England. Why lose your good job just to go and see London? They say it's just like Lagos. Francis was an African through and through. A much more civilized man would probably have found a better way of saying this to his wife. But to him, he was the male, and he had the right to tell her what she was going to do. Ada, from the day of her registry marriage, has seen the romantic side of her life being shattered, like broken glass about her. Francis had had a very expensive education at Hussey College in Wari, but his outlook on life was pure African. He had had little opportunity of coming in contact with Europeans as Ada had. Those God-forsaken missionaries, they had taught Ada all the niceties of life. They taught her by the Bible, where a woman was supposed to be ready to give in to her man at any time, and she was to be much more precious to her husband than rubies. It was all right for a man who had seen rubies before and knew their worth. What of a man who would throw rubies away, thinking that they were useless stones? What was she to do now? Cry? It was too late. Who were these people anyway? Street parents who thought they knew a great deal of a curious kind of philosophy by which she was not going to bring up her children. There was no point in arguing with Francis. There was no need to ask him who he thought he was. He just would not understand. Be as cunning as a serpent, but as harmless as a dove, she quoted to herself. So she was to stay in Nigeria, finance her husband, give his parents expensive gifts occasionally, help in paying the school fees for some of the girls, look after her young children, and what then? Rot? So this was where her great dream had led her. She should have married one of the Baldys. It was too late now. Not even her Baldy would have her. All she had to do was to change the situation, and that she was determined to do. She pretended to be all for the plan. Of course, she would stay in Lagos and look after the family. Of course, she would send him money regularly, and if possible, move in with her mother-in-law. Francis was not to worry about her at all. Everything was going to work out well. My father told me I made the right decision the day I said I was going to marry you. You know what he told me? No, I'll tell you. He said to me, Ada trained herself. She learned very early to let her common sense guide her. She had the makings of a woman who would think before she acts. Very few women can do that, I tell you. They both burst out laughing. Father was right, was he not? Francis wanted to be reassured. Yes, your father was more than right, that he knew. Ada thought to herself. First of all, Francis must go. Then she would get down to work on her in-laws and work on them very hard until they let her go. Plans for Francis's departure were soon underway. He got together everything he needed in no time at all. It cost Ada a small fortune though, because it was bribery all the way through. To get a passport in those days, one had to bribe even the messenger at the passport office. Curiously enough, the office was manned by policemen. Even the man at the top, whose fee was £20, was a policeman. All his subordinates were paid £5 each. Francis and Ada lived on Francis's income and spent all others on the preparation for his departure. The night before he left Nigeria, Francis took a group photograph with his family and Ada's little girl. Ada refused to pose for the photograph. She did not know why, but just did not wish to appear in it. Maybe it was because she was too big with the new child, but she knew the photographer could have cleverly disguised that. A relative of theirs came to make a special prayer to the river Buchi. Some pieces of kola nut were brought by Francis's mother, and these were broken by the relative. Then they were thrown into a circle on the floor, drawn with a chalk. A long prayer was sung to the goddess, who was 400 miles away in Ibuza. She was requested to guide Francis, to keep him from the evil eye of white girls, to make him pass his examinations in good time, to bless him with all the money in England, to bless him with everything that was good in England. She was requested especially to forget him when circulating diseases and anything plaguey. This confused Ada. Was Oboshi responsible for the lives of people in England too? She wondered. In any case, at the end of it all, they were all ordered to eat the pieces of kola nut, which was munched with great satisfaction. That was the trouble with being a believer in all these transcendent beings. One did not know when one aroused the anger of one or the other. For instance, did the chewing of the kola nuts offered to Oboshi automatically make them enemies of Jehovah? Well, Ada debated with herself. Oboshi, being such a powerful goddess, might be able to protect them from the wrath of other gods, but Ada's being a Christian complicated the issue all the more. Didn't the God of the Christians, whom Ada believed in, tell Moses somewhere that he was a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me? That God would hate them for chewing those pieces of kola nuts. Ada was sure. Nothing would deaden her guilty conscience, not even the fact that her mother-in-law, who was a devout Catholic, bought the kola nuts, nor the fact that she was munching away happily herself. Ada looked at Francis, who carried the Bible every weekend telling people the good news of the kingdom from a 2-penny magazine called The Watchtower. Well, it was all right for a mother-in-law. She would quickly go to the padre, or if you like, father, who lived round the corner at St. Paul's Church, and confess it all to him. The padre would then give her absolution. That would free her conscience to sin again if she liked. As for Francis, he became a Jehovah Witness whenever he felt like it, or when he could use it as an excuse for being selfish. When Ada was ill with her first baby, Francis had given his blood to save her life, forgetting that the witnesses were not supposed to do that. When he was busy with his preparation for coming to England, he forgot his watchtower and awake. He also forgot that coming to England was seeking after materialism, which he preached to Ada was not only evil but unnecessary, because Armageddon was round the corner. It was all right for them, but she did not know whom to turn to herself. There was no padre she could confess to in the church she attended. She belonged to the Church of England. They had nothing like watchtower and awake, neither had they any system of absolution. They left a guilty person with a nasty conscience. But wait a minute, she told herself. Didn't Jesus say to the Pharisees that one should give unto Caesar what was Caesar's and to God what was his? Well, that was what they were doing. She could quote the Holy Book to support it. There was nothing to worry about. The whole family turned out to wish Francis a safe journey at the airport at Ikeja. When husbands left their wives for the UK, their wives were all supposed to cry from love. Ada prayed to God the night before to send enough tears to impress her parents-in-law. Those tears of hers had a way of coming down at the wrong time. She wanted them to flow at the airport so that when Francis became an elite, he would remember that poor Ada wept for him even when he was a nobody. Well, those tears did come, but at the wrong time. She watched Francis bid everybody goodbye, dry-eyed. All his sisters were like that Alice in Lewis Carroll's fantasy, weeping away like mad. He would remember them when he came back an elite, with strings and strings of qualifications. He will forget me and my child, and the other one I'm going to have in 3 weeks' time. Ada thought as she stood there, away from the clan, just like an outcast. Francis was disappointed and showed it, but he gave her a pat on the shoulder. Poor Ada, her heart ached for the departure of the only human being she was just beginning to understand, just learning to care for. Maybe the separation was too early in their marriage. She did not know, but what she did know was that there was an ache inside her heart, too heavy for tears, too heavy for words. She simply stared at them all. Everybody's name was being called, and all the passengers stood one at a time at the plane's door, waved the final goodbye to their folks, and then disappeared into the bowels of the whale-like monster they called the aeroplane. Ada had never seen an aeroplane at such a close range. Why? They were bigger than buses, she thought. The air hostess was smiling unnaturally and waving two hands instead of one like everybody else. Why was that? Ada wondered. Then the door was cruelly slammed shut. The slamming of that door, the finality of it all, reminded her of something she had seen before. She had seen it all before. This cruel finality. The other person who was shut away from her like that never came back. Where did it happen before? She searched her memory as she stood in that scorching Nigerian sun. Then her mother-in-law moved towards her. Ada did not know what it was that drew that woman towards her in that burning sun. She touched Ada's unfeeling arm and said in a choked voice, "It looks like a coffin." Ada turned round, saw her, and started to howl. It all came back to her now. It was Pa who was nailed down into the bowels of a smaller whale because he was going to be the only inhabitant of that one. This one was bigger, but it had the same aura of finality. Please God, it won't happen again. He is going to arrive there safely. Please God, let nothing bad happen to him, she cried. The relatives wiped their eyes and stared at Ada. What was the matter with her? Wives cried in the presence of their departing husbands, not when they had gone and could not see the tears. No one said anything. After all, she was going to provide the cash, so she was allowed a little eccentricity. The fact that someone so young could earn so much as Ada was enough to drive her to extremities, they said. Francis wrote from Barcelona and then from London. "You did not cry for me," he accused Ada in his letters. "You were very happy to see me go, were you not? Was that why you did not wish to appear in my send-off photograph? You did not care for me." Now with what type of soap was Ada to wash herself clean of this dirty accusation? How was she to write to Francis and say, "I cried for you"? No, I even howled like a mad Zulu woman at the airport because the door of the plane reminded me of my past coffin. He would think she was mad, so Ada decided against it. She simply let sleeping dogs lie. She sent him money regularly, bore him another child, this time a son, went back to work 12 days afterwards, having had only 3 weeks annual leave. There was no provision for maternity leave at the American consulate then, but the staff had a big party for her, all American, all very rich and very nice. They knew what Ada was going through, but they were diplomats, not missionaries or social workers. A few months afterwards, Francis sent his wife and parents the results of Part 1 examination. He had passed, so for Ada, it was time to act, or she never would go to the land of her dreams. She was so happy about Francis's success that she babbled about it to everybody. She was not too surprised about his early success, considering that she had taken this same exam 4 times in Lagos before going to the UK. There were still the second and the third parts, and the way Ada calculated it, Francis would stay another 4 or even 5 years. In one of his letters, he even mentioned his wanting to be articled. That would take 5 years at least. What was she supposed to do in the meantime? She wrote and asked Francis this, and was shocked to read from him that he would like her to come, but from her behavior at the airport, he was sure she did not care. Well, that was all she needed. She went to Francis' mother, appealed to her to look at all the women who had been to England, pointing out the fact that they all drove their own cars. Think of it, Ma, Francis in his big American car, and I in my small one, coming to visit you and Pa when you retire. You will be the envy of all your friends. Mind you, in England, I will work and still send you money. All you have to do is to ask, and then you will get whatever you want. All the girls will go to secondary school. I've almost finished reading for librarianship. All I have to do is to work, look after Francis, and attend classes in the evening. And when I come back, I shall earn more than double what I'm earning now. Ada won over her mother-in-law. If going to England meant her earning more than what she's earning now and riding a car as well, then she was all for it. Pa was still doubtful. He had suffered from unemployment when he was a young man and knew that the type of job Ada had then did not grow on trees. My going to England would be regarded as a leave without pay. That softened Pa. The next problem was the children. Her mother-in-law sensed that if Ada took her 2 babies, she might never send the money she promised. Ada had a good solution for that. She was very fond of jewelry and had invested a small part of her income in this. She had several necklaces for a little girl and herself. She gave them all to her mother-in-law. You take them. In England, we shan't need them, and when I come back, I shan't be wearing gold anymore. Ada boasted with a faked smile on her face, whilst her heart sent her mother-in-law to her maker. She never asked Ada what she would be wearing when she came back from England. Diamonds, maybe. Mother-in-law was shocked all right, and before she could recover, Ada had had her kids immunized and paid for a first-class passage by boat for the 3 of them. She was completely deaf to the warnings that she was paying over £200 more than was necessary for their passage to England. She was told to wait another 6 months and she will get cheaper accommodation in the cabins class. 6 months was too long a time to wait. Mother-in-law would change her mind. She was still not completely sure that her dream was coming true until she was on the deck of the Oriole, Vicky in her arms and Titi holding on to her skirt. It was then she saw her brother, Boy, in a brown African robe that was too big for him, crying and wiping his eyes with a velvet hat. Ada did not cry for their in-laws, and funnily enough, they did not cry for her, but all she needed to know was that a member of her own family was there, missing her. Boy was like Pa and Ma molded all into one, standing there. She cried too, this time not a howl, not an empty shoe, but tears of real sorrow at the thought of leaving the land of her birth. The land where Pa was buried and where Ma lay, quiet forever. Only she and Boy remained of that life which she had known. It was never going to be the same again. Things were bound to change for the better or for worse, but they would never be the same. Boy was now all alone. He had to work very hard to keep the family name going. Ada had dropped out of it. She had become an Obi instead of the Ophelie she used to be. Boy had resented this, but his presence at the wharf showed that he had accepted the fact that in Africa, and among the Igbos in particular, a girl was little more than a piece of property. Ada had been bought, though on credit, and she would never go back being an Ophelie anymore. The tiny hands clutching her blouse were the hands of a big man in the making. Her duty was to throw them down. From now on, her children came first. All she could do for Boy was to make him aware that he had a sister he had every reason to be proud of. She might not come back a millionaire, but she would come back with pride. Ada wiped her eyes and waved to her brother, the distance between them lengthening so much that he soon became like a small black coma, and then he was gone. There was no time to wallow in self-pity. All around her were wives of diplomats and top white civil servants going home on leave. Life was changing fast. Being there in that first-class section seemed to give her a taste of what was to come. God would help Boy as he helped her. She gave her children to the nurse and relaxed. It's nice to be treated like an elite, a status they were achieving. Had not Francis passed his first examination in cost and works accountancy, were not she and her children on their way to England? She knew she was determined that they would go to English schools, and if possible, English universities. She remembered what she had told her mother-in-law the very night before. We shall only stay 1 year and 6 months. The poor woman had believed her. That was life, she said to herself. Be as cunning as a serpent and as harmless as a dove.